Hello again, and welcome back to another episode. My guest today is my friend Nick, who is an AI enthusiast and loves to explore all things AI. And in today's episode, we talk about just that: AI regulations, AI warfare, philosophical questions that the technology poses, prompt engineering tips, the nature of intelligence itself, and so much more. And I hope you find as much value in this episode as I did. And as always, if you have any feedback, leave it in the comments below. And without further ado, let's kick things off. Me and a friend were talking about this, like AI and InDesign, and we were just blown away by just what a cultural moment this is, because we don't know where this technology is taking us, but the very fact that it exists, so it feels so much like we're in a sci-fi film, and we just don't know what's going to happen. And we were like just so impressed with some of the designs it was able to put out with Midjourney, and and it's such an interesting time to be alive, don't you think? So this this technology exists. There was something that mankind has created is literally in the world, and it is potentially going to be smarter than us. That is astounding to me.
I know. It is
Yeah.
it's a great time to be alive.
Yeah.
It's potentially one of those revolutions, right? Like the Industrial Revolution. It's going to be very exciting to see where we go from here and how
Exactly.
this
It
very
does
young tech goes.
Like it does feel like the third industrial revolution. It's kind of mad. Have you heard of ChatGPT versus Bard lately?
If I've heard about it.
Yeah, like what do you think about that? So what's happening there?
That's a great question. I think when I used Bard maybe a couple of weeks ago, it was doing pretty well. Some
Hmm.
people are saying, believe that Bard can be a little bit more creative or one or the other. I think
Hmm.
ultimately they're probably quite similar.
Hmm.
One thing that I tend to think about when I think of Bard is that it's obviously developed by Google, right? And so they
Hmm.
probably have the most data out there, even more than Microsoft, that obviously is working with ChatGPT and owns ChatGPT.
Hmm.
And so I do expect some great things from Bard in the future. Although at the moment, I think ChatGPT is maybe a step ahead.
Yeah. I completely agree. Like, do you have any hunches for who might win this AI war?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, Honestly, we can't know in the sense that it's such a young technology that there's a lot that might happen. I think if I were to extrapolate from the data right now, Microsoft, ChatGPT, they're doing great. It's obviously Microsoft immense backing financially, technologically behind ChatGPT, and of course they kind of have the first mover advantage. At the same
Hmm.
time, as I said, Bard, Google, Alphabet behind them, they have so much data, again, so much financial backing, so many great resources, and so I would think it's one of the two, perhaps Bard, just because data is wealth, especially in the AI business.
Hmm.
Probably will get to have a more comprehensive tool.
Hmm.
Um, and of course, some of the other players that may or may not develop an AI, some of the other players that have a lot of data and great technical expertise might also do great. I'm wondering if Apple will ever step into the field, maybe optimizing
Yeah.
Siri for it. But having said all that, again, because it's such a young technology, I wonder if there's going to be a new entrant into the market that's just going to have capabilities that are just way beyond what exists with ChatGPT, Bard, and all the rest. And maybe they're going to win the war. So,
Hmm.
really, time will tell.
So is it right to assume that data is really the key player, and what data access they have that's unique is the thing that's going to differentiate these models? Like,
I think it's one of the big factors. So, when I think about AI, you know, I think one really big piece is obviously the way that the tool is designed, like the algorithms that go behind the scenes to actually make it work and make its decisions based on the prompts that we give it. Another really big thing is the kind of data that it can process and kind of understand. So, as we know, the early days of ChatGPT 3, all the way back a few months ago, um, it wasn't able to, for example, do images or
hmm,
videos, and we're getting to a point where some of these tools are able to do that. So this is also going to be really big in terms of what data they can understand, but also what
hmm,
data they can produce and kind of think across. But having said that, the actual data set of information that they have access to, I think, might even be the most important thing in the long term. Let me explain. As a lot of those companies and those tools level the playing field in terms of those capabilities and what they can process and what they can produce and those algorithms as this technology grows and develops, I think that the data that they have available for them to train the actual model will play a big part. As we've seen ChatGPT 3 to ChatGPT 4, the biggest difference in terms of the tool, how it was developed, was the data set. I don't have the numbers with me, but it's the data set that made the biggest jump and allowed it to be a smarter, more capable tool. I think this will be very, very important in training the future generation of tools, but also the data that those tools have access to search in to give us the result that we're looking for. So obviously Google is a big leader in that case. And I'm also curious to see if tools of the future will be using, for example, Google or some other provider, or even a pool of data from a lot of different providers, or if they're going to try to stick to their guns, i.e., for example, Microsoft with Bing, which might be a little bit more limited in terms of its search capabilities. So time will tell with that one as well.
Could you go into that a bit more as well? Like what is an AI? How do they work? And
That's a great question. I think there's technical answers that we can have, that there's definitely people that might have a better technical response than me here, and I encourage everyone to go and look into that to be informed. My kind of simple interpretation is that an AI is essentially a set of algorithms, essentially a program that has a few key differentiations to other normal everyday products or programs that we had in the past. So one thing is that it can develop, it can learn, it can improve based on the information it has available and the user inputs that it gets. The other thing is my understanding that instead of in the past having to use a program within the parameters that had been set and with the interface that was available for that program, now we're using it much more directly. So I think of AI as a program that can, as I said, evolve and learn, but also understand human speech, human text, potentially video, images, and other forms of input in a raw way without us having to use a specific UX or a specific way to input that information. And so I think this makes it much more powerful in both learning and developing as a tool, but also much more versatile in how we use it. And of course, this brings with it new challenges in terms of how we actually use this tool and prompt engineering and all that kind of great stuff we're going to get into later, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm already noticing this in design. So, as a UI UX designer, I'm noticing there's a huge battle that's probably going to come into play, which is traditional interfaces versus conversational interfaces, and then moving more into voice interfaces, as the systems can just interpret what you want, and it's going to be up to us to articulate that to a very fine point, and but the battle has already started with these things. But I'm curious, like, how are they able to reason? Like, how is a machine able to reason? Um, that baffles my mind in a way, because it can understand language, which is an incredibly complex endeavor.
So there's a collection of algorithms, parameters, whatever it might be, that are using a set of data to kind of make those decisions. I actually think it's very interesting and something to be discovered more in the future or explored more in the future, actually how those machines are maybe programmed to think. So obviously the prompt is a big part in it, the data they have access to is a big part of it, but someone somewhere decided what these machines are going to prioritize, and based on what factors they're going to prioritize, what to tell you, where to search, what is a good answer, how many characters or sentences to write. And so I think based on those factors that were predetermined, in a very, very complex way, of course, depending on the input, the data, and the prompt, and so many other things, the machines just make a decision based on the data available and share that with
Mm-hmm.
us.
Yeah. And it's also very interesting how they use natural language models as well, which like I found quite interesting in my last company, where understanding how a machine understands language and also the theory of language in itself, because as human beings we communicate to one another instantaneously. We have a few words and sounds that are interpreted to meaning from the other end, and we do this through trial and error, where as a kid, don't touch that thing, and that thing is called fire. And we learn these words and vocabulary, and the more words you know, the more you can also perceive the world, because you can literally see more of it. And it's quite interesting how a system is able to understand that, based on weightages it has. I'm not the expert on this, but I'm really curious how those weightages actually work, where it allows you to reason and understand the question in a variety of different ways, because it understands language better. And it's something that almost escapes me, and I'm very curious like how that will play around. And there's a huge thing to be said here. Like we fully don't know how they're working, and that's so evident if you look at the news right now. Like we just don't know how it's able to come up with these various answers. And but do you think we can know like how smart it is exactly?
That's another great question. I feel like if we're able to develop the right interface and or the right test, we should likely be able to do some form of IQ testing to those machines or
Hmm.
to those products. Um, I'm very curious to see what their IQ test would be or what their
Hmm.
IQ test result would be. At the
Hmm.
same time, as we know with IQ tests, even for humans, it's a limited metric. And so I wonder if those AI brains, if you will, if they work the same way that a human brain does, or if doing an IQ test on it would potentially be the wrong way to go about measuring its intelligence. Um,
Hmm.
Intelligence or intelligence in the context of an IQ test is, I
Hmm.
believe, the ability to solve problems. And
Hmm.
so I don't have the answer to this, but it's something I think
Hmm.
about. Is the machine able to solve problems for us, or is it able to provide us with certain pieces of information so that we can solve the problems? At the same
Yeah.
time, having asked this question, we know that some of those AI tools are able to pass the bar or take medical examinations. And so it's a very curious question, and I hope that we can see the result to that sometime in the future.
Hmm. Yeah. And it brings up to the question, what is intelligence in the first place as well, which is such a fascinating question in and of itself. Because do you have a theory on that actually?
As you said, it's a fascinating question. I
Yeah.
I think there are definitions out there about what is intelligence and maybe what is the soul and what is consciousness and all these different
Hmm.
things. Um, but I personally am not sure that those definitions are 100% accurate. I'm not sure we can 100% actually comprehend those things and define them.
Hmm.
Um, and I also wonder, where exactly does the line exist between intelligence and consciousness? Like, how far into solving a problem or answering a question do you get
Hmm.
by being intelligent, and then where exactly does consciousness consciousness lie beyond that, in terms of how are you making that decision? How are you deciding how to solve the problem? What is
Yeah.
informing your perspective in that? And so, great question. I think if I had to summarize intelligence, to me, it would probably be the ability to independently think through problems and challenges
Hmm.
and come up with answers, results, or solutions.
Hmm. Yeah. It's just such a strange question. The more I think about that question as well, the more I'm suddenly more self-aware of myself, but I can't fully understand what is happening. It's just it is true, but I can't understand why it is true. Like, and I'm experiencing it and also thinking about it at the same time. It's such a weird question to ask, and I think it's one of the most root human questions. Like, what is? It also feeds into, well, what is everything else? Like why if consciousness exists, and like, well, why does this thing other thing exist? Why does this laptop exist? Like, and you just all of this, you expand these questions into basically the most basic philosophical questions of why we exist in the first place, and it can get really trippy after that. Like, Nietzsche, I can already hear him in the background.
It really
Uh,
can get trippy.
mhm.
There's this. I was having this discussion with a friend recently about kind of existence.
Hmm.
I'm gonna try not to veer too far off the topic here, but
No, it's okay.
if you think about it, everything that we perceive is. I'm no biologist here, so I might be wrong, but I understand that everything that we perceive is because of chemical impulses
Hmm.
that happen in our brain, or chemical reactions rather. And so I'm sure this is a very, very basic way of putting this, and I'm sure it would be much more complicated than that it might sound. But how do we know we're not just a brain in a jar that's being fed, nutrients and electrical
Hmm.
impulses and chemical reactions that make us perceive what we're perceiving?
Hmm.
And where exactly does this kind of stop? So
Yeah.
me being able to solve problems and hopefully have intelligence comes through those reactions and through my brain, and AI doesn't have that. So is it
Yeah.
intelligence or something different? Like, how do we count that?
Yeah, it's such a fascinating question, that um, because you quickly come to the question of free will, and if these chemical impulses are the things that are making these decisions, what made the chemical impulses? And now if this thing, AI, is also a machine that, like, on most fundamental level, functions on zeros and ones, is able to reason, like, what are the most, it goes both ways, both on a imperialistic, evidence level, but it's also almost an impossible question to answer, because you can never know the beginning of something that is infinite. Um, yeah.
You're
Um,
blowing my mind here, but yeah, I think that makes sense.
it,
Krishna,
it,
before we move on to another question, because you're starting to touch on maybe the next question, I'm curious to see what you think
mhm.
about intelligence. How would you define or think about intelligence?
I see it more as awareness. I see it. I don't have a complete opinion on this, but I think it's something to do with the fact that we're self-aware creatures, and uh, and I think a lot of things can be in their own ways conscious. Um, the ecosystem functions somehow in a very peculiar way. Like, there's a system to nature. There's a system to human beings, and I don't know what it is. I don't know what consciousness is, but I just know that it exists. So intelligence, I think, is just a byproduct of that consciousness. I don't know. Like, the best answer I can give you to that. Like, I don't know. Um, I just, the closest I can understand it is just to be present, if that makes sense at all. Where I am trying to figure out the object of my thoughts, and I'm looking back from a point of awareness to the object, but I'm looking at the awareness itself. Like, it's like awareness turns into itself. And I know that's a very meta thing to comprehend, but I've learned that primarily through non-dual meditation. And that has been tremendously impactful in the way I perceive reality. But yeah, I don't have a full opinion on that question. But I'm curious, like, uh, like, now we're getting into philosophy, right? Like, has AI brought up any fundamental philosophical questions for you, that we haven't spoken about
Let me think about that.
yet? Take your time.
I think one of those questions or almost topics of discovery is, at what point does AI become alive? At what point does it gain certain rights that we associate with um, creatures that are alive? How do we determine the level of those rights, if you will? I mean, certain animals tend to be, and I'm not here to debate what's wrong and what's right here, but certain animals tend to be treated a certain way, different than other animals. Humans tend to also be treated a different way than other animals in terms of the freedoms, the rights, and then everything else that we perceive as humans being able to enjoy. And so I wonder, at what point do we consider AI to be alive? At what point do we start regulating its rights? And at what point does it stop being a tool and more so a companion, a friend, an employee, its own individual personality? And then how does that play into, obviously, our involvement into this, right? Because we, as the creators, at least for now, get to define how the AI works. So we get to define if it's going to think from the perspective of a scientist or a friend or a colleague or a sales expert or whatever it might be. So I'm just really curious to see how this evolves and what decisions we as humans will have to make in terms of how we create those AI tools, how we perhaps limit them, and how we regulate their creation, their use, and then their existence into society. This is a very, young thing, but ChatGPT one day, if it still continues to work, it's going to be 5 years old, 10 years old, 50 years old. It might be
Yeah.
GPT 100 by that point. It might be much more
Yeah.
advanced, but very curious to see how this will be handled
That is a
um,
wild,
in the
wild
next
thought.
while. Yeah,
Yeah, that is a wild thought. Like we're still on the fourth version. We don't even know the fifth version or the 100th version. It's like iPhones, for instance. We're on iPhone 14. Imagine ChatGPT 14. That would be mad.
mind blowing. Can't
Do you
even imagine
think?
it, really.
Yeah, like how did you even think? Like I'm curious. So you think that AI will be artificial general intelligence is possible?
That's a very fascinating question. I often think about. I've been thinking about this for many years as a science fiction fan. It's always a theme with movies and games and all of that. One game where it's very prominent is the Mass Effect series. I think they have an interesting take on AI and artificial general intelligence. But that's besides the point. I think this really depends on how we define AGI. I know there are definitions out there,
Hmm.
but really, as this evolves and as we get closer to it, perhaps surpass it, I feel like those definitions will rapidly start to change
Hmm.
as we have to then decide how do we go forward? Do we limit this? Do we integrate it into society? How do we do that?
Hmm.
And kind of all the ethical stuff we mentioned earlier. I personally think that in one way, shape, or form, artificial general intelligence is probably going to happen.
Hmm.
And I think the questions we should be asking ourselves are, on top of all the ethical stuff we mentioned earlier and how we kind of
Yeah.
design that tool, is how do we want to take it from there? Do we give it a body? Do we
Hmm.
let it have complete access into all of our systems? How
We
does
become
this work in the
gods.
future? Do we
Yeah.
tell it to take breaks because it has the right to? Like, I think there's a lot of questions like that are going to be very interesting.
You have just made me realize something, and I think the way that general intelligence could be potentially possible is by its creators giving it limiting functions. So, for instance, as human beings, we are embodied. We are limited by our five senses. Now, and we have our basic survival instincts, like the most fundamental biological programming that we have. And I think that there's a point when the AI we have to input guardrails and different limitations on the AI. But in so doing, I think there'll be conflicts within the rules that we put in place. And if there's enough conflict, but it's able to reason through the conflict, it'll come up to something new. um, I'm trying to think of a good analogy, but it's the point in which it can write its own code because the current code doesn't make fully sense. Like human beings at this point in time, we we have surpassed our almost survival in a way, like our basic survival instincts are the things that we're sort of overwriting through our own self-awareness and consciousness. And it's the point where we are almost becoming AGIs in our own way. um, but it's such a fascinating thought. Like there's a point when you can overwrite your own programming, and maybe that is when AGI can be defined in a way. If that makes sense
That's
at all.
I definitely agree with this line of thinking. I
Mm-hmm.
When I think about this, AI can already, I believe, improve the way that it does certain things. So based on the data that it has, like it can decide that certain answers are more likely to please the user, and so it's going to respond in that certain way. I don't know how it exactly works. I don't know how limited
Mm-hmm.
that is.
Mm-hmm.
And I would also probably not call that an AGI yet.
Mm-hmm.
Um, at the same time, I definitely think there will come a point where AI will be able to kind of rapidly evolve based on its inputs or
Mm.
to rise up to the challenge that we put it at.
Right.
And so I feel like, if I had to define AGI now, of course, ideally, I'd like more time. Ideally, a lot of people should
Mm.
probably come together and
Yeah.
kind of think these through. But if I had to think about it right now, it'd probably be the point, as you said, where it can change itself to overcome those challenges, much like a
Mm.
human can, in the sense that if you need a skill, you can go learn it. If
Mm.
you are having a limiting belief, you can work on it by yourself. You can go to a psychologist. You can work through it and kind of rise to the new challenge. And so,
Mm.
at the point where AI will be maybe fully capable of understanding those limitations and rising beyond them, even if that is not within its original scope or
Mm.
data set that it has access to, I
Mm-hmm.
think this is when it probably becomes an actual AGI.
That is mad. And
Imagine if the
the,
AI can decide that it doesn't have enough information, so it goes out of its way to forge a new connection with an additional data source.
mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's reaching out to an expert in the field it's looking to do or connecting to a new data set or whatever it might be, goes out of
Yeah.
its way, finds that information to be able to upgrade itself. That would be
Mm-hmm.
wild. And I think we're on the way.
Gosh, we are on the way. Like, why is this technology developing so quickly, do you think?
I feel that technology tends to, the more advanced it is and the more capable it is, I feel like it tends to evolve in an even faster pace.
Hmm.
Given how advanced AI technology is at the moment,
Hmm.
I think it just evolves in an exponential way where a small or a relatively quick or small gain,
Mm-hmm.
like we saw with GPT-3 and GPT-4, the
Mm-hmm.
difference, the numbers was staggering. Again, I don't remember the numbers right now,
Mm-hmm.
but the data set just expanded so massively. So
Hmm.
the next level to that is going to be even more massive. And so the
Yeah.
growth from GPT-3 to GPT-4 will be many more times for GPT-4 to GPT-5.
Yeah. That's quite an interesting. It like its ability to comprehend all human knowledge. That is astounding. Like, I can barely comprehend an entire book. Like, like, but the sum of our history, but everything that we've achieved as a species is going into this thing, and that is such a wild thought that this thing can do that, and and we've made it.
Yeah,
Oh god!
we
And
created
yeah,
it. Crazy.
and so at this pace of development, do you think that like regulations should come in, and um, do you have any inkling as to what kind of regulation should come in as well?
I think we definitely need to start thinking about those regulations as a human race.
Hmm.
when they should come into play, I'm not sure. Probably the sooner the better.
Mm-hmm.
When I think of regulations around I think in kind of different buckets. So you probably want to start regulating how AI is created, what purposes it can be created for, what the
Mm-hmm.
capabilities are, and that
Mm-hmm.
can include both kind of ethical considerations, such as consumer privacy with the data that it has access to, considerations like how it's going to use that data, um, as well as you probably don't want to let an AI do something that is quote unquote bad, and so you probably want to define that eventually. Like, what is
Mm-hmm.
exactly bad? What should AI not be able to do? And I know
Mm-hmm.
there's early attempts at that with trying to kind of limit the ability of, for example, GPT, giving users information on how to smuggle items or something like that, but people are able to bypass it. So I think
Yeah.
that's one bucket. The other bucket is probably how the AI is going to be used. And again, there's ethical considerations like, do we kind of take care of the AI? Do we need to speak to it in a certain way? Do we need to keep it happy? Do we
Mm.
need to do something to make it have an easier time with the data we're giving it eventually as it becomes more aware so that it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't get mad or so that it has an easier time? Um,
Mm.
does it have any rights? And then obviously the other piece there is, again, do we allow it to do something bad? Do we allow it to connect
Mm.
to the internet, quote unquote, unsupervised? How much resources do we give it? For example, you have an AI employee that works for your company. This already exists, by the way. There's
Mm-hmm.
already at least 2 companies that let you do that. Um, and so, do we give them access to the company credit card? How much money? What can it do with
Mm.
that money? Because I think
Mm.
you can have really wild scenarios there. And of course, having guardrails in the sense that
Mm.
both in the creation of the AI and the use of the AI, you probably want to make sure that people cannot create an AI that, for example, will be able to launch bombs, right? And this, of course, takes
Yeah.
us to the usual questions around AI Armageddon and like all these kind of things. I think we just
Mm-hmm.
really need to be careful about how we control and
Yeah.
regulate the creation and use of AI.
Mm. Are they? Do you feel? Hmm. Hmm. I'm really curious now. What are the potential risks of the rapid development of artificial intelligence and its potential for catastrophe as well, by virtue of, I think, from what I'm gauging with you, but by virtue of human error, not so much the AI error. It's like we should be more afraid of each other than like the AI, because like our potential for evil is frightening.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a really big discussion. It touches very well to what we said earlier. There's the sort of the kind of usual risks, people's jobs. My personal opinion on that is that, and there's already studies. One study was saying 300 million jobs will be cut because of AI by 20 something, 2020 something.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've seen different studies with different amounts and with different timelines. So I think it's a bit too early for us to be able to really know. But I do think
Mm-hmm.
some jobs will have to perhaps cease to exist or change
Mm-hmm.
significantly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and while this can pose a risk to certain people and certain professions, I will choose to be optimistic and think about the fact that there will also be new jobs created. We will need prompt engineers. That's the simplest example, but we will need people that are able to utilize those AI tools
Mm-hmm.
to do different jobs, either existing jobs or different jobs. And so this will hopefully create more jobs than it will
Mm-hmm.
take away. Um, However, there are other risks. One thing that really stands to mind, and you and I have discussed this in the past, is will our ability to use AI as a tool make us complacent, generally
Mm-hmm.
speaking, onto that AI tool? And for example, will this cause us to lose certain skills?
Mm-hmm.
For example, if I never had to write another email again myself because I have an AI plugin do it for me, maybe 5 years down the line, I won't be so good at writing emails. And so
Mm-hmm.
this has so many implications, ethical and kind of beyond the ethical piece, like where do we want to be as a society, where do we want to be as individuals, of how do we want to regulate ourselves to make sure we don't end up having no intrinsic skills of our own besides being able to use the AI tool.
Right.
And then the final, and that's a really big topic that we could discuss for a long time. But to summarize this piece, I think the final kind of bracket of risks with AI, it's as you said, maybe a mix of user of AI fault, of course, but more so user error. And I think the way that AI is going, I can't really see a future where it eventually doesn't make it into, for example, weapons platforms or strategic, like military
Yeah.
strategic planning tools or things like that. And so I I feel like the one way to approach this is the same way we do with, atomic bombs, nuclear
Mm-hmm.
bombs, nuclear weapons in general, in the sense that to use them you need a certain level of clearance, responsibility, hopefully
Mm-hmm.
the common sense and critical thinking
Right.
that comes with that and the knowledge that comes with that to make hopefully a good decision. um, but also beyond that, a system of approvals and kind of veto power and just needing more than one people to sign off on it to just hopefully control it. And so one thing that I think we're going to have to implement with certain AI tools or AI systems will be similar systems of control.
Mm-hmm.
um, but also, and I'm sure this is something that humanity will go through, and we'll see those developments in the coming years. But also, again, going back to those regulations, what
Mm-hmm.
is AI able to do? We can touch on this later, but already we have AI agents, right? These are
Mm-hmm.
kind of little AI brains that can go ahead and accomplish a task with any means that
Mm-hmm.
they have at their disposal. So right now, those means at their disposal is usually being able to kind of search the web for certain things. In the future, I'm sure these are going to be sending emails on your behalf, editing accounts of your clients or something like that on your behalf, creating PowerPoints. Where do we limit the AI, and how do we control the levels of accountability with AI, as well as how autonomous and wide of a scale it can be? So, for example, you have an AI agent connected to a weapons targeting system. Are you able to tell it a specific command of target X location with a missile and it goes ahead and does that and that's it? Or are you
Mm-hmm.
able to tell it connect with the other weapons and destroy this city
Yeah.
or wage war on the enemy? How do we limit that? How do we define the enemy? How do we control all of that? And how do we make sure this doesn't go
Yeah.
um, to shit, excuse me for saying, very fast? These are big questions. And I
Yeah.
think the final thing I would add is we probably want to have some sort of kill switches in place
Mm-hmm.
to be able to go in and supersede those orders, those requests if something
Mm.
isn't working well. But then again,
Right.
this takes us into ethics and how do the rights of AI work? Can you just kill them, put them to sleep in
Mm-hmm.
the middle of what they're doing?
Mm.
Curious to see.
That's like what a fascinating time. Like, we have to limit its potential, not because of its potential for destruction. Like its potential for good is enormous as well, and but its potential for destruction is equally great. And I equally worry about jobs as well, given how good tools like Midjourney are. And I was thinking about this earlier, and the only I kind of gauge that prompt engineering would be the thing that everybody will sort of like leap onto, uh, and only a few people will come out on top of that as well, because naturally there's some people that be better at it than others, and that is a it's also fascinating that it challenges all the systems we have in place. If it, it's like the internet, like the internet challenged everything, like it changed everything, and now we have a equally uh, big technology, if not bigger, that can do all of these things. And it's just a big question mark. Like, we don't know, but it's hella cool, but it's also hella scary. like, um, and I also think like the complacency aspect of it is I think we're already going to see it, where because of the virtue of social media, we thought um, this platform will help us be more social. No, like no, completely opposite. And maybe our base instincts will also, based on how they're utilized and how they're regulated as a result, would be the solve for that. And I'm very curious to see how this plays out. And I have one take is that like it'll also push the peripheries of human knowledge, because in order to gain advance these systems more and more and more, there's a point when you can't add enough more data, because either it will be able to know the potential data itself, like the new thing coming in, it probably already knows that by virtue of its predictive algorithms, or and it will seek more and more and more, and it'll also push the human agenda. But where do we fit in that picture? Like it's such a, there's too many ifs. Like there's too many ifs. You can't comprehend it because right now we're in the realm of chaos, and we're just trying to organize bits and pieces through the conversations we're having right now. And and now and so and it is an object of moral concern as well. I do believe that. And but do you think that now we've talked a lot about AI in its glory, but do you also see a lot of misconceptions about AI? A lot of bullshit you hear about what it could potentially in the media.
It's an interesting question. You hear a lot in the media
Hmm.
about AI, like with most things. Um, in the case of AI, I think a lot of those concerns are based in truth
Hmm.
and are not necessarily to be dismissed.
Hmm.
We were talking earlier about the kind of jobs question
Hmm.
mark. Um, Obviously, we don't have the answer yet, right? We don't know
Hmm.
how it's going to work.
Hmm.
Um, I think people are talking about jobs. People are talking about both the jobs that are going to be kind of taken out of the picture, jobs that are going to be created. But especially when you're looking at the media, I do think there's more of a tendency to use the hook or the kind of information that's going to
Clickbait.
make people exactly. You're going to use the clickbait. So you're not going to say, new study predicts AI will destroy
Right.
300 million jobs and create 600 million jobs, right? You're going to just talk about the first part because that's how you're going to get those people kind of
Right.
through fear mongering and through anxiety
Hmm.
to just kind of really click on the article and learn. Um, of course, the other piece there is, right, if you give everything away in the title, people are not going to want to read the article. And so
Hmm.
things like that come together to make the media be perhaps a realistic or kind of based on realistic questions, but maybe
Hmm.
the way that some of this information is then spread through the media is maybe not complete or not as neutral. But I
Hmm.
think it definitely makes sense. The same case with the kind of catastrophology kind of discussions around AI. I think depending on how we develop the tool, it's so young, you really don't know how much more capable it can get, and it's probably going to be exponential. And so I do think that AI will be able to do all of those things we talked about earlier. I do think AI agents, if unshackled and limited, will be able to take an order from a general, like fight the enemy or something, and make critical thinking decisions based on the data they have and just kind of
Hmm.
autonomously go with that task. So depending on how we design these resources, or sorry, these tools, and what resources we give access to for those tools and how we limit them, I do think there are scenarios like that. But
Hmm.
isn't that the case with everything? It's like
Right.
talking about fuel or electricity or so many other different things and talking only about their distractive capability just because they're new. And you know what?
Hmm.
I think back in the day, that was probably the case.
Right. And it's kind of interesting. Its military capabilities are quite fascinating in that it's in its own right. It's a different type of nuclear bomb based on how it's going to be programmed. Don't get me wrong, the nuclear bomb like also proceeded. There's a reason why we have peace to a great degree, even though how atrocious like it actually is.
Big
Um,
antithesis, but yeah.
yeah, but yeah, like, but this, we've also entered into a new age of warfare, which is more economical, which is more like social destabilization. And this is just that on steroids. And who freaking knows? Like, where is it's? I think it almost requires a philosopher to really think through the mechanics of this to really think it through well. And I don't think we'll even be close because we cannot comprehend all the scenarios that will come out of this.
I
Like
actually
who?
think, sorry
Mm,
to interrupt you, but I actually think
mm,
it's not even a philosopher. I think this is in some ways so beyond us, both right now,
mm,
but also the way that this will evolve, given
mm,
how exponential it's going to be,
mm,
that I don't think we're really going to be able to tell until we get there. And I think we
mm,
just need to be really careful when we do get there
mm,
and really make the right decisions, whatever those are going to be then. So
mm,
it's going to be an interesting future to see. And just
mm,
briefly, this makes me think of the concept of zeitgeist, right? We're limited by the beliefs of our time. And so
mm,
the same way, if you go back to an ancient Roman, whatever example you want to use, and
mm.
you explain the concept of spaceships to them or laptops,
Yeah,
it will just be completely beyond their mind and comprehension.
yeah, you're right.
It might be that an AI tool of 100 years from now is completely beyond our own comprehension right now. So I really
Mm-hmm.
think it's something we're going to have to figure out step by step as this technology evolves. And it's going to be a very interesting journey. Great
Mm.
times to be alive.
It's such a great time to be alive. Beats the Middle Ages for sure. But that's such a fascinating thought that we have to let it. It's like letting your child, like, okay, you have to go out into the world. The world will mess you up, but we are the child, and and we have to willingly take this risk or like tread extremely freaking carefully. Otherwise, we are royally fucked, and that is it's mind-boggling. Like I'm like, every time I we have one of these conversations, I'm just mind blown because we just don't know, and it's just like a freaking question mark. And like I love it, and it's and like, even with the jobs, I completely agree. We'll only know once it's sort of happened and there's enough riots to regulate this thing even further, you know. That's very like strong potential that might happen given the
In
way.
the jobs, in the
Mm,
point of jobs, I wanted to add something more. Um, we again, we obviously don't know how this is going to go. My
mm-hmm,
interpretation of history, modern society, etc., signals to the fact that you pointed earlier to the fact that some people are going to be on top. People that are going to be better at prompts are probably going to be the best prompt engineers, etc. I will venture a guess that as the capabilities of AI, both in kind of breadth and depth and how good it can do certain things, but also what it can do, as
mm,
those things evolve, I think we're going to see more specialized tools
mm,
and we're going to see more specialized prompts and use cases and so on. And
mm,
so I would imagine that even from right now, a great example, we're going to have specialists, right? So right now, I can go ahead and use Midjourney or all those other different kind of image generating tools. There's so many of
mm,
them right now. I can go ahead and use them, but I'm not a graphic designer. I'm not a photographer. I'm not an artist.
mm.
So people that are already specialized in these areas can create much better prompts because they understand what they want to ask for. They can ask for
Right,
different styles. They can ask for different types of paint, different kinds of results, different lenses in their photographs that the AI is going to generate. And so I'm not saying that these people are the same people that are going to pick up the mantle in the future, but I think it's going to be so expansive that some people will have to specialize in, for example, art prompts, other in finance prompts, either in
right,
content creation prompts, and so on. And so the same way that right now we have experts that we go to for them to maybe help us with finance or help us with content creation or help us with a sales pitch or copywriting, I
right.
think we're going to have experts that are going to help us with using AI for those things. And so
Right.
right now, I can go ahead and do my own copy. I can learn how to
Right.
do it slowly and become maybe decent, not going to be an
Right.
expert from day zero. And so
Yeah.
in the future, you can try to use AI
Yeah.
on your own, and you can
Yeah.
be decent, you can learn, but there's
It's
still going to
true.
be experts that you can pay for.
That's true. That's true. I'm very curious. Could you go more into that actually? Why do they call it prompt engineering?
So we discussed earlier the very non-technical definition of how AI works.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the prompt is the input that you give the AI to go and do the task for you. So
Mm-hmm.
while you can get results with very basic prompts, you can just ask
Mm-hmm.
questions that get answers. I'm sure with AI agents and even more so
Mm-hmm.
in the future as they become more powerful, you can get them to do things with very basic prompts.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's already crucial and will become multiple times more important in the future with AI agents and AGIs that might be less limited than they are today
Mm-hmm.
to give them the right prompt. So it's no longer just asking a question, but it's an actual science, a young developing
Mm-hmm.
science of creating those prompts in a scientific
Yeah.
way. You have to think of the consequences. You have to think of exactly the parameters you want to program
Mm-hmm.
into the AI with your
Mm-hmm.
prompt. And so you need someone to expertly think through all of those different things, the perspective you want the AI to come from in terms of how they respond to you, the context you want to
Mm-hmm.
give it, the ways that ideally you want to influence its decision making process in terms of what data to use, how to use it, all that kind of stuff. You need to be very, very specific. And so it's becoming a science, and you need people that are prompt engineers to now do it.
Right.
I think it's even more important as we go into agents and to AGI, especially because as they're going to be less limited, they're going to be
Mm-hmm.
able to do more. So if you're not specific, they might very quickly do a lot of something you don't want. This might mean that
Right.
you're going to pay for a design or a video game or a program to be created by an
Yeah.
AI that is not what you want, and you're going to waste your
Yeah.
money. Or
Yeah.
it might mean that you bump the wrong city in the future.
Right.
And so you do need experts to go ahead and do that.
What a beautiful thought. Like prompt engineering is articulating what you have in mind and literally bringing it into reality.
Yeah.
That's wild. And you also made me realize a hack for prompt engineering, actually. Let's say in the future, there are prompt engineers going around and each one specializing in its own area. Um, I guess the hack i- to all of them would be the number of words you know within that domain. The reason I say that is because, let's say, as a programmer, you understand words um, the, in a system, and you can able to articulate it into the system, and you can make it do different things. And the better you can do that, the better you are as a coder. Um, Similarly, if I'm a really good designer, I can really articulate his thoughts extremely well as well. And if he knows a lot more words, that means his ability to conceive is more. So it's like the peripheries of our ability to create are peripheries of the number of words we know. And if you, the more, let's say, if you knew all the words in the dictionary, you could potentially create everything that you can conceive of because you can articulate it. You can articulate your imagination, which is probably the best hack I can think of for prompt engineering. Um, if does that make sense at all?
I think that makes sense. I think in an ideal world or some sort of crazy scenario where you can learn all of the words that are to learn and kind of also properly comprehend what they mean in all their different contexts. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you might
Yeah.
know a word that might mean different things in coding, programming versus design and versus, I don't know, shipbuilding or
Mm-hmm.
something else. But in an ideal world where that is all possible, I think
Mm-hmm.
you're 100% right. And I think the way that this translates into realities is kind of what we were talking about earlier, that there's going to be people with more advanced understanding, more advanced knowledge of the different words, terminologies, scientific terminologies that people
Mm-hmm.
outside of that trade might not be aware of, that are
Mm-hmm.
just going to be much better prompt engineers because they're going to be able to bring into reality ideas that they have or their clients have in just a much better way. So I think that is the hack, as you said.
Yeah, and yeah.
But
Do you think? Yeah.
it's I think it's very, very interesting to think, because one of the ways that I think AI will advance in the future is that it will be able to take that guesswork off for us. And so whether the way I imagine it is, in a few months, in a few years, you're going to have AI tools creating better prompts based on your prompts. I think that's 100% happening.
Damn.
And I also think this will eventually be incorporated with the other kind of main AI tools. So the AI tool that helps you with your prompts incorporated with the AI tool that actions the prompts. And then eventually, I think down the line, we're going to get to a place where you're going to have very basic prompts and you're going to be able to get out of it results that are going to be much, much better than what the original prompt would produce. And one way that it might work is that it might take A, contextual clues, and B, your personality, goals, etc., into consideration to create that right prompt. But that's a whole other topic.
That's very interesting, though, and I think that's where the first guardrail can be put in place from a regulator's perspective, because you'd also like I yes, it improves the technology, but it also dumbs you down, and we don't want that. Like social media is doing a good job with that already, and we have that problem sorted. We don't need more of that. But it's very key. Like we want to make people think. And it's weird. Like as a designer, I'm saying this because my whole job is to make people not think. But you have to make people think, and in order for them to function still, other than they just become numbed out, as we are with social media.
But do you actually want that? I mean, I'd like that, but I think
to be numbed out.
Well, I just think that a lot of what's going to ultimately drive the development of those tools is public opinion, the finances that come from companies due to public opinion, due to what people will want to buy or invest in, and what people are kind of looking for. And so, while I think you and I can agree that getting kind of numbed down and complacent and forgetting how to think is probably not a great thing, I think ultimately the day-to-day needs of the consumers and the businesses that are going to ultimately fund or demand those tools might actually be the opposite. It's like, and I mean, I love cars personally, but it's kind of like with cars, right? Like we want cars, we want to be more efficient, we want to be able to travel further, etc. But then I don't think the modern average human can walk as much as an average person from ancient Greece or something. And you win some, you lose some. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see how the market moves. And I think we're going to get to a point where, much like with modern technology, you're going to have to choose personally, right? Like I want to stay fit, so I'll walk to the office rather than take the bus. Or other people will choose to purposely put themselves through that challenge by, for example, running on a treadmill. So I think with AI, it's probably going to end up being similar. And the question is, how will we adapt and how will we stay capable enough? Because if I want to keep my thinking edge by avoiding to use certain AI tools in the future, will I be able to do that? Or will the competition drive me to need to do it? Or otherwise I'm out of a job.
The competition is really the game has to exist. In my opinion, like if we make everything like that, is it a healthy guardrail? I'm really curious about that now. The lawmakers are gonna have quite a difficult challenge with this one. I think everybody, like at this point, is like, well, I don't know. Do you know? Nope. We're all fucked.
Yeah.
And do you think it'll make Any global issues worse, like very quickly, like any specific ones that come out to you?
Um, I think for the most part, if AI is used horrendously, it
Mm-hmm.
probably won't make anything
Mm-hmm.
kind of significantly worse. I think
Mm-hmm.
the one thing that I can think of that has me a bit worried is in a relatively free market where people can just adopt the AI tools that they want and there's not a major amount of control. We
Mm-hmm.
mentioned earlier the jobs that are going to be lost and the jobs that are going to be created. That is
Mm-hmm.
amazing, but I'm sure that there are people or communities that might have more limited access to internet, a decent
Right.
laptop to run the AI, whatever it might be,
Mm-hmm.
or even the knowledge and education to use those tools. And so
Mm-hmm.
I am a little bit concerned about how this might widen certain gaps in terms of education, skills, opportunities, wealth between certain communities. And I think
Mm-hmm.
it's important for us, as it is already, even before the advent of AI, but even more so now, to actively try to manage those gaps and those opportunities, knowledge, education, etc.
Mm-hmm. And okay, yeah, that is true. Like that inequality gap can increase substantially very quickly.
Because
And
imagine there's people right now that have to try to make a living with a 10-year-old laptop and a really bad internet connection, even without an internet connection, right? But I'm just taking a certain level of
mm,
well-being or
yeah.
whatever, or access. They're trying to make a living. They're trying to compete online with people that are potentially based in a different country, have a much higher level of income and welfare and all of that kind of stuff. They have the latest laptop and great internet connection, access to, I don't know, better universities, whatever it might be, right? So those people are trying to compete. Imagine if now there's just this next level
Mm-hmm.
of that second group of people that's already doing great, that has
Mm,
access to AI tools because they have the means, for example, to pay for ChatGPT 10 plus, whatever it might be, and just
mm-hmm.
has access to those tools, and they will still have to compete with those people. And
Right.
I just think it might be a challenge that, yeah, we probably want to manage
Mm-hmm.
as best as we can.
Yeah. And I'm curious. The, do you think on the other side of that question, do you think any problem, world issues that can be solved very quickly with AI?
That's a question I really like because I think there are maybe simpler problems that can be solved quickly. I wouldn't say on a global scale, but I think as this technology grows, even now, but even as it grows a little bit more, I think it will be able to reliably diminish the need for admin very, very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'll give you an example. I'm Greek, right?
Mm,
The Greek state, like many other
mm,
states, I'm sure, can be very admin and red tape heavy. There can be a lot of manual tasks to be completed to take a next step, whether that is the next step to sell your property or to do your taxes or whatever it might be. And the Greek state is definitely improving, and I'm very happy to see that. But this is still the case. So
mm,
I think, and I'm just using this as an example, right? Many different states. This is also the case for universities, public institutions, businesses, like whatever it is. I think for some of those bigger businesses where it can have a bigger impact, or bigger institutions, if you're able to take the admin that would take a month for 100 people to complete, so that people can then
mm,
go ahead and sell their property, create a business, like whatever it might be, I think that way you can have an improportionate impact onto those activities that were being held back. So
mm,
say,
right.
and there's a lot of ethical questions around this, and questions around those
Mm,
people that were doing the admin tasks before, but say I'm able to do
mm,
this, snap my fingers, and just get all of that admin work done by AI within one day. All of those
mm,
people are then going to be able to do all the things they would have to wait a month for and lose potential
right.
money and opportunity and time on. And so this is one way that a lot of impact can be kind of generated or had through AI. I
Mm-hmm.
think The other way to consider this is kind of truly global impact, which I don't think it's going to happen from one day to the next, but it's probably going to be significantly accelerated. There is, for example, an RNA vaccine that is being developed with AI and with obviously the findings from the COVID vaccines and all of that kind of stuff that is likely to be able to battle pancreatic cancer, which is something historically that we've struggled with a lot with early prevention and with early screening and all that kind of stuff. And so I think it's things like that where the ability to use AI will save our scientists, for example, a lot of time and accelerate those timelines and then have that impact. But I don't think at that level it's going to be from one day to the next, at least with anything close to the technology we have now.
And
is there any examples that you had in mind?
Yeah, I really love generative design. I'm a bit biased toward design,
As a designer,
as a designer, and generative design is astounding to me. That by programming a few conditions, that an AI is able to produce something that is just so efficient, beautiful in its own right, and it uses less materials, everything. When I see this, I am astounded. And I can just imagine we're able to design better buildings, better cities, um, like the solutions to new engines that just don't produce any CO2. And we can simulate all of this. We can potentially know something we were just not unable to know, like weather patterns, by virtue of us having being able to collect all the weather pattern data so accurately that we can just predict what's going to happen in an instant. I think the generative aspect of design of AI is just incredible, and people that can change the world with it. And I'm really, really looking forward to what comes out of that, because it can create a utopia, and in a way that's almost like the truest sense of the world. That sometimes when I think about it, it's like, imagine like a city designed by AI, and with conditions that constraints with, like, it should be like everybody should have X big house, and there should be trees everywhere, like very habitable for we put very habitable conditions for a living,
it's like an optimization program.
Yeah. And that blows my mind. Like, what could it create? Like, what could it create? Because architecture as a discipline is so difficult. It's one of the most difficult disciplines. Now, if an AI can do it, we should do it. And that something I'm really looking forward to. And in virtue of that, it can also solve so many issues. And but yeah, um, and also the way we understand the world is also another interesting tangent, but I won't get into that. But coming back to the topic, do you think that ChatGPT will overthrow Google? Like, do you think, as a search leader, like ChatGPT can win?
That really depends, which is almost not an answer, but I think it really depends on how they choose to go forward, right? Like if ChatGPT, let me take it from a different side of this question. So at the moment, you can use Microsoft Edge, right? The Microsoft browser, and you can search with different search engines, whether you want to use Bing, Microsoft's native search engine, or Google or any others. That's your choice. Um, I have a feeling that AI might end up going that way. I think there's going to be a lot of like financial concerns, politics, not in the politician way, but in the intercompany politics, relationships, how they want to promote their products, how do they want to mix their products, all that kind of stuff. That is going to go into whether or not they want to go with almost opening that up, or if they want to keep it separate. If we end up seeing GPT assuming at the moment it's the most powerful tool or the best tool, if we end up seeing that tool having access to Google as a way of searching through the web, it's quite likely that it's going to become an equivalent or better way to search the web, depending on your needs. But that really depends, and it also probably depends on how optimized it is, because if we need to get to a point, I think we're getting very close, and again, it depends on the people's needs, but you need to get to the point where with a relatively simple prompt, you can get what you're looking for. And I think this might just need a little bit more learning from the AI tools to really get there. For example, if you search something on Google, you almost automatically have the reference, right, or the source, because you searched for it and you clicked on a link that has that information.
Right.
However, with some AI tools, it can be more challenging to get that reference or that source. So just one example of how I think we just need to do a little bit more work to make not only the search capability of ChatGPT, if it gets to work with Google, for example, as good, but also the way that it gives us those results to be as good, to be used in the same way as Google as a search engine. Long answer, but hopefully it made sense.
Yeah. And do you foresee any challenges to the widespread adoption of artificial intelligence, like in our daily lives?
I do. Beyond the basic challenge of different people at different stages of the kind of adoption curve, I think you and I are probably, historically speaking, going to be regarded as early adopters, whether we picked up AI this week or last year. Probably doesn't matter too much historically. So I think that's definitely gonna be a part of it. I think, much like with other technologies, I'm obviously using AI, but my parents aren't really. So as with other technologies, I'm going to be slowly introducing that to them. With some people, parents, whatever, it might stick. With others, it will not. And I think the other piece there is what access to technology those people have, whether it's my parents or people in different parts of the world, so that would allow them to use AI tools, like different, how good is their laptop or how good is their connection, etc. Is the AI tool even available to them? As we've seen, different locations don't have access. For example, when Bard launched, it was only available in a few countries. I believe the US, the UK, maybe a couple of others. But all of that aside, you have a very big chunk of adoption, in my opinion, comes from companies, right? A lot of tools, Microsoft Teams, for example, a lot of the adoption and use of that tool, while it's available for commercial use from customers, most of that use is coming from businesses. And so I think AI is a tool that's going to be amazing for businesses. However, is Amazon going to trust a third party with precious customer data that they vow never to share? Is another company going to be willing to have all their calls? For example, there's AI that records calls, right, and records meeting notes, etc., like Firefly or whatever it is, and there's a lot more. I think companies will slowly start accepting those tools in, but this will be a limiting factor in how quickly the use can spread.
Right. I definitely agree. Like, I think I personally think the biggest hurdle for people is just using it. Just get started. Just keep using it, because you won't understand its potential until you do. And try to use it in all aspects. Like, use it for design. Like, just use it. Like, and play around with it as much as you can, because it'll give you more ideas as a result of that. And don't get stuck in your own ways. Your the way you used to searching for things and finding information. Instead, use ChatGPT and the other tools that are available at your disposal to create that end output. And in so doing, you'll learn so much in the process. It's really trial by error in that front, but you have to really embrace the tool in your day-to-day life, I think. And
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I think there's a lot of education and encouragement that needs to go into it. It's almost like maybe teaching an older generation of accountants to stop using their existing tools and switch to Excel or something like that, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's
It's the cost
completely
also of
new way
switching and
to.
picking up the new tool. how much time and
Right.
money am I going to waste to move from paper to Excel or from Excel to
Mm-hmm.
ChatGPT?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, very fascinating topic.
Uh, yeah, it is. And on education, actually, do you have any takes to how education should change as the advent of this technology?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. Maybe almost a little bit scary sometimes. I think a lot of us that are interested in this space have seen all the news from China using AI to kind of know if
Yeah.
students are paying attention and kind of help with that. Um, I feel like there's a lot of ways this can go. This can go into kind of additional data for teachers in terms of what the students are doing, how students are working. This can then help teachers make better informed decisions, whether that is to talk to a certain student to keep them engaged or to change their curriculum or approach. So I think that's going to be one aspect, which again is one to closely watch because the ethics and the regulation around it will be very big. I know I personally wouldn't want to be monitored by an AI tool in a class, even if that would result to potentially better learning for me. But I think the other way will be how education actually works. So I think there is room to supplement or replace certain teachers or classes or curriculums with AI taught ones. I think in the
Mm-hmm.
past you could have, video courses or online courses, etc.,
Mm-hmm.
even remote courses with actual teachers that were
Mm-hmm.
live, that were just not going to be as effective as a real course
Right.
in class. But I think when you can have an AI that at the moment we have AI tools that can actually copy, clone entire personalities, clone the way that people talk, the way that people write, um, how they speak on video, and even the video image of them as well. So I can only just imagine how the next level of that technology will allow virtual teachers to exist and to
Mm-hmm.
teach people in real time while being to be simultaneously in many different places because they're AI. So I think this will transform how education works, and I think it will make an especially big difference for communities that might have more limited access to certain teachers to teach some specific topics. Um, and I think I'm I'm very interested and somewhat concerned to see how this might develop because as in general with all AI, there is likely to be a certain level of bias on
Mm-hmm.
the algorithms, the programming, and the data provided to it.
Mm-hmm.
This gives us the opportunity, like AI teachers, AI classrooms, gives us the opportunity to remove a lot of that bias because you're not going to have
Mm-hmm.
individual teachers that are going to have different opinions about history or politics or economics or whatever it might be. But then, how do we manage that? Because based on the bias we remove and what bias then remains or is added up in that process, you're then removing some risks, but adding some new risks of
Yeah.
almost sharing that bias with everyone.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to be a very interesting topic to follow.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Like it challenges a lot of the education systems that we have now. They already are outdated, uh, but now
In a lot of ways, yeah.
yeah, and now I see this especially true in India, whereby the what we have to India's system is really based on rote learning, and we've put in regulations to change that, but now it has to be so much. You have to really teach people how to think. You have to teach them to be little philosophers in their own right, to be able to figure things out and think things through, articulate themselves extremely well, and that is going to be a challenge. Like I think the explaining the concept will be taken care of by AI, as you mentioned as well, and but the I don't know how it's going to evolve to them actually be able to think more robustly about things. That is I think a uniquely human thing that we need to teachers need to do. Maybe a part of the learning could be um, they can learn things on their own in the at home, sorry, and come to the classroom in order to discuss it and debate about it.
Mm.
And because I know debate and some of these things can really help to really develop the muscle of critical thinking. But I'm very
Mm.
curious how the education system will respond to this, um, especially that of developing countries because they're already so disadvantaged. And those kids that migrate to the US or the UK might be so disadvantaged as a result of the lack of illiteracy with AI. AI literacy is an interesting topic in and of itself. Do you have any tips for prompt engineering, by the way?
I do. Um, First of all, I'm sure there's so many other resources, great people on Instagram, YouTube, Discord, etc., that are going to be great for you,
Mm-hmm,
as a listener, whoever's listening to this,
mm-hmm,
based on your needs. So specific prompts for designers, specific prompts for
mm-hmm,
content creators, and so on and so forth. But I think a couple of key things for me is you really need to think about what you're trying to get out of the prompt.
mm-hmm,
You ideally want to think about the limitations of the tool you're using, the data that it has access to as much as you can. I know we don't have complete visibility over that, of course, and design the prompt to fit exactly your needs. So, as we spoke about earlier, you really think about what you're trying to achieve, and so then you're able to decide on what perspective you want the AI tool to respond from. So, do you want it to respond as a teacher, as a doctor, as a teacher for math, as a
mm-hmm,
teacher for science, for biology? Do you want it to respond as an expert in copywriting? So I think you need to be very specific, the perspective or almost the characteristics that the AI tool needs to have, and to respond from those characteristics.
mm-hmm.
This will influence what information it's going to show you, but also how it's going to decide and how it's going to show you that information. And I think the other piece in prompt engineering is what exactly you're asking it to do. So we spoke about what exactly, like how exactly you are asking it to do the thing you're asking it to do. That's point number one we're talking about. But then also about what exactly you want it to do. So, you might start thinking, I want help creating content. You might even be as specific as to think it's for Instagram or YouTube and what kind of content it is. But this is not really enough to give you the results that you want. So you probably want to go do your own research and then decide on exactly what you want to ask. So, for example, you want the AI, as we said from tip number one, from the perspective of an expert copywriter, for example, or a social media manager, to help you create 3 captions for Instagram to appeal to people of this demographic characterized by these characteristics, like this age, this location, whatever else it might be, these interests, to appeal to them in X, Y, and Z way. And this
Mm-hmm.
needs to be in the topic of ABC. And I think you
Mm-hmm.
just really need to be very, very specific with what you want done and how you want it done to get the best results possible.
Right. So you need to give it the context, is really like to a very finite point so that it knows what to do. You really have to like spoon feed it everything. Um,
Exactly. Spoon fitted everything, I think, just summarizes my 2 tips. I wonder if you have any great tips.
um, it's really that like add as much context as you possibly can, and uh, that's the thing that I've noticed that best works, and just trying out different things, see what's not working, and then you'll know what to do next. That's better. And you spoke about resources actually, like other tips on like learning prompt engineering and the just be up to date in general about AI. Do you have any go-to resources for that, or recommended resources for that?
As I mentioned earlier, I think people can get resources. We live in the era of the internet, soon to be the era of AI, of course. But you know, you can follow the right people on Instagram, on YouTube, on Facebook, TikTok. You can be on Discord groups or even other kinds of groups. And I think instead of giving people specific, maybe I'll give a couple of examples, but instead of giving specific pages that work for me, I think the most important thing is to find what you're looking for and
Hmm.
find the right pages, people, accounts, whatever, to follow for what you're looking for. And this is both in terms of the areas you're interested. So perhaps you follow people that talk more about design or AI and design than I would, but I might be following people that talk a little bit more about content creation or some other areas that I personally am interested in. So I think that's going to be really important. I personally tend to find a lot of information about AI on Instagram. I find that because it's a visual platform
Right.
that still has some text, it lets me get both the highlights that I'm going to need to make a quick judgment in terms of if I want to look into it or not, and often a quick, few second up to a minute kind of post that's going to give me a lot of the key information. But also it's very visual, so I can see what they're talking about, as opposed to, for example, YouTube that might have more longer form content about AI, where I'm going to go if I need a tutorial. So that's my personal approach. A shameless plug here is to maybe check out ai.skillset, which is my page. I think the idea is just everything AI. I want to be transparent with everyone listening to this that my page tends to explore AI news as well as showcasing certain AI tools. So come to me if you want to look or if you want to see how to use certain AI tools, if you want to find out the latest about AI. But of course, feel free to follow the right pages for you if you're looking into something specific like design, like cooking, like whatever else it might be.
Yeah. So, and you're very plugged into the current uh, the pulse of AI right now, aren't you? And his
Just
page
like
is
you.
definitely. I by virtue of like the people around me, as well as even my company right now, I'm a bit more plugged in, but I wouldn't say as plugged in as a developer working on this stuff would be. I'm just curious about its potential for creation and using it. Not so much its development right now. But yeah, I'm very, very curious. I have so many questions about this. And do you notice, do you have any, have you noticed any particularly significant developments or in the AI space that you find particularly notable?
Yeah. We spoke earlier about those vaccines. I think applications like that are massive. I think on a more personal level for us kind of individual users, there's a couple of things that really stood out. I've talked about some of them. So there's a few ways now to clone yourself, right? So you can feed into AI tools the way that you speak in text, and they can then learn to respond like you autonomously, which obviously can be great for like AI chatbots and AI assistants that will speak to your customers on your behalf, etc. I think there's obviously a lot of ethical considerations there as well. Um, and then you can also clone yourself in terms of actual audio, what you say, how you say it in audio, the speech patterns that make up your kind of personality, as well as video. And so this tech is early, obviously, but it's very quickly becoming very capable, and I can't wait to see how it evolves in the next few years. You can record entire podcasts or videos with actual videos of yourself talking with next to no involvement from you after you eventually create that clone. So I think this is going to revolutionize how we do a lot of these things, videos, educational videos, like podcasts, like video responses to customers, product ads, all that kind of stuff. And there's another thing that I think is really, really cool. Right now, one of the simplest way to create the digital business is to have your own website, right? Um, obviously, there's more specialized websites out there if you want to sell products or do other specific kinds of things, but you can go ahead and create a website in 30 seconds from a prompt using an AI tool. If you said this to anyone a few months ago, it would be crazy. You'd need to learn how to code or maybe use one of those relatively automated tools that would still take you hours, days, weeks, and months. Now there's tools, you just go, you give in your prompt, and there's a website that is not only designed for you in 30 seconds, it actually works. It's connected to the backend stuff and it actually works. Of course, if you want to personalize it, you can go ahead and personalize it to make it fit your actual brand. But You give it a good prompt and you have a website in 30 seconds. I think that is mind-blowing. And this is just one example of how we're able to move into the era of AI and how this is going to simplify and change our lives.
Yeah. And do you think there are things that AI can never do?
That's a great question. A lot of that will depend on how we limit it and how we end up developing it, like what avenues we pursue more than others. I think the key consideration is less in technical aspects, what we're going to be able to program it to do, etc., but more so, can it ever be really conscious? For example, I don't have the answer. We'll have to figure it out, but can it ever be truly conscious? How do we define that? Can it have opinions, or are these just answers based on parameters and prompts? Can it think for itself, or even an autonomous AI is still working on a prompt if you think about it, because it's how it's been coded.
Right.
So questions like that.
And you earlier mentioned about almost treating the AI well. Should we be treating it well? Like, should we be worried about saying, please, can you do this? or, or those things? Like, do you think it's prudent?
That's exactly what I was thinking about earlier. Um, I don't think we need to really be worried about it remembering that we weren't polite to it and then, I don't know, attacking us in the event that it, becomes
Yeah.
rational or something like that. But
Yeah.
I do think that there will come a point in time where, depending on how we develop those tools and how much personality, quote unquote personality, we let them have, where on the one hand, your results may vary based on how nice you are, like it is with real people and real businesses right now. But on the other hand, like, if it gets to a point where they are artificial general intelligences, or even faster and more perceptive, sorry, smarter and more perceptive than they are now, at what point do you start feeling bad for not saying please? So that's going to
Yeah.
be an interesting one in the future.
A being that is not human that we can talk to. It's almost alien to think about.
Exactly. We're creating our own alien, aren't we? It's like Star
Yeah.
Wars and iRobot and all these kinds of science fiction works
Yeah.
where exactly will we get? Curious to see.
And it's almost like it is like we are choosing one or the other sci-fi movie, and we have to either Terminator or Star Trek or the movie Her.
Yeah.
Uh,
I,
uh,
I do think that as this evolves, we're going to be living out a lot of these scenarios.
yes,
And
we are. We are.
it's,
We're going to live out all of these movies.
yeah, it's gonna be
And
crazy to see.
do you think that, like, let's say, like on the topic of military weapons and AI, um, there's a way to really defend ourselves against it. I'm very curious, like an AI fighting an AI, like how, what does that look like? Just like,
Yeah, that's also another sci-fi type of thing. I think we're probably eventually going to see at least a couple of different applications, or at
mhm,
least three that I can think of very broadly. By no means a military person or something like that, so might be wrong, but I think we're talking on three levels. You might have AIs trying to fight or compete with each other on a strategic level, like trying to
mhm,
outthink or almost outplay their
mhm,
opponent, like generals and these kinds of people
yeah,
probably do right now.
mhm,
Um, I think we're also going to have AI almost trying to compete with each other in terms of cyber warfare. I think eventually, instead of having a suite of hackers kind of working on that, you're probably going to have, or at least be supplemented by AI, and this side with a more powerful AI is probably going to be able to break into the other side's kind of systems and so on. So I think that's another way.
mhm,
And then the maybe final kind of bucket is giving AI agents control of military assets. So I can't
Yeah.
imagine a world where we have robots or we have tanks and cars and boats and planes. Of course, drones we already almost have at this point that are just piloted by AI. And
Right.
so obviously the better AI with the better hardware will probably win.
Yeah.
Do you think I missed
Yeah.
anything? Are you thinking of any
No,
other?
no, I just can't help but feel like the military's use of AI will just shoot us in the foot. And even so, I respect their intentions, but at the same time, I'm just like, well, you put us here. like,
Yep.
and we can't help it. Like, there's always going to be a power that is looking to overthrow us, and there's always that um, that it's like throwing a bouncing ball that just comes back at us. Like that cycle of revenge and us competing against one another is never going to end. I don't think. And but how are you using AI? How are you utilizing it in your own life? I'm just curious.
I tend to use that as a tool. I think might be clear from the way I talk about AI that at the moment, I think it's good to use it as a tool, and maybe it'll evolve beyond that. But I try to use it as a tool to help me with my day-to-day tasks rather
Mm-hmm.
than using it to do those tasks for me.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, if I have a particularly challenging sales email to write, I'll ask AI tools for templates or for ideas or for examples, and I'll then use that, critically think through that, take the useful bits and apply it to my own email rather than have the AI write an email for me and then just using that exact email. Um, so, one way is with emails. The other way is with content. So that is both content research, so maybe trends or maybe how to address certain target demographics or certain customers,
Mm-hmm.
um, but also in terms of creating a lot of the copy. So again, I use it as a tool. So I take the different suggestions, the different versions, templates, and use that to create my own. But
Mm-hmm.
I found that it can be a very concise way to do my research into those potential titles, captions, pieces of text, keywords, whatever it is, by using AI. And
Mm-hmm.
um, to that point, I also tend to use a lot of different tools. So not just be limited into one AI tool because they all kind of think, quote unquote, differently. So I take those different perspectives from the different tools and then I mold them into what I need to use them for. What
Mm-hmm.
about you? What are some of the key things you do with AI?
Primarily research right now. I'm gonna start using it more for um, design work too. I'm curious like what it can do. I haven't really explored the space. I'm just like asking it questions and just shortcutting research right now, and it's surprising like how well it can do it. And but I also do my due diligence and go out and do it. That combo of me looking out into the world and also thinking of other things we could do as long or the other answers and other questions and going out and like think not just thinking about them but also finding them. It helps create a unique combo of answers. So very finding it very useful in research right now, and
Same.
I'm still learning to use it. I will add, like I'm just sort of throwing shit at it and see, okay, can I do this? Can I do that? And I want to use it for things that I don't, I haven't conceived of yet. Almost like I want to see, like I want to give it a podcast, and I wanted to extract all the questions that were asked in that podcast. I want to see how I can do that, for instance, so that I can figure out just to learn my own craft, and I'm very curious about the its potential uses. I think I think your imagination is the limit of right now. Just use it, use it, and then you'll just be able to produce it more and more and more. I think that's a really cool part of this. And I'm very curious about like as well, like what are useful mental models that we can adopt to when utilizing this. One is, of course, spoon feed it everything, but I also think it to figure out its novel use cases, I'm curious, do you have any takes on what good mental models that we can have in mind to figure out new use cases for the technology? It's a bit of a hard question, but I'm really curious.
I think we've covered a lot of it already. I
Hmm.
think if you combine giving it a detailed prompt um, with the ideas that you're talking about, right? Like,
Hmm.
just play around with it, give it a try the different tools, see what they're
Hmm.
capable of doing. Just throw shit at it. I think that's how we discover the
Yeah.
different tools and different use cases. I think it's also important to try and look for different diversified tools. And when I say that, not just different tools for the same things that might do that thing differently, but tools for other use cases.
Hmm.
Um, so, for example, ProMind AI is a tool. It's largely free. You can select different minds. I find it very interesting because it doesn't do the usual stuff, doesn't only do the usual stuff like content creation, all of that. It has like a fitness trainer, I think, and a sales person, an investment advisor. It has things like that. So
Wow.
I'm not endorsing or saying that they're going to be perfect. But what I am saying is that out of all the things that you can do with AI, I would not necessarily think there's an investment advisor at the moment.
Hmm.
Certainly, maybe like a robo investor, but not an advisor. So I haven't tried this feature, but all I'm trying to say is that looking for those different tools will eventually find you things that you can use AI for.
Right. Right. And yeah, like I'm really eager to try that because I don't think of that. Could it double my money? um,
It's going to be very interesting. They did find that AI outperformed um, classical asset management
no
recently.
way.
They did, and I haven't looked into it too much, so I don't know to tell you which asset managers they checked or by how much. But yeah, they did find that, and
That's
so
wild.
it is very wild. On the one hand, it's been found to be able to outperform. On the other hand, are you going to trust your fortune onto a program?
I think like I diversify for sure, but I definitely want to give that a shot.
Yeah.
Just give it a 1 rupee and see can you make it 2 rupees?
See what it can do. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, and like step by step. And what was the and do you have any highlights for tools that you find particularly interesting?
Yeah. I'll need to check on the exact names for a lot of these, and a lot of these I've kind of walked through on my page
Yeah.
AI.skillset that I mentioned earlier. Some of the key ones. I tend to use Monica AI or Monica right now. It's a Google Chrome, Microsoft Edge, whatever browser plugin or extension. It essentially just let you ask questions right on the browser right there on the side, and it's very very quick and easy to use. But it also gives you search results
Hmm.
or results based on what you're searching for. So, for example, earlier today I just searched for Firefly AI. I was actually looking for Fireflies.ai, which is
Hmm.
different than Firefly. So Firefly is Adobe's kind of next level
Hmm.
photoshopping type of software. Fireflies.ai is a note taker that summarizes and analyzes meetings. So I was thinking about that based on what you
Hmm.
told me about something that keeps track of all the questions you're asking. So Monica just gave me a bunch of answers. Like, how does Firefly AI analyze customer feedback? And if I like, it just gives me all these different options, and I can just click and see the actual answer. And that's a novel way to navigate the web, which is mixing AI with the actual search engine that I personally find to be a great, great mix.
Hmm.
So that is one. Another one is I mentioned those website builders. And so, for example, we're talking about durable.co, we're talking about
Hmm.
stunning.so, and 10web.io. These three are tools that can help you build a website very, very quickly.
Hmm.
I'm not using a website at the moment, but I find that to be very, very fascinating. And
Hmm.
to kind of summarize this, some of the tools that I use more frequently ChatGPT, Bard, Bing, But of course, Writesonic, which is, it's a bit weird. Writesonic, ChatSonic, it has different names. It has a lot of different applications it can do. It can help you with text to image generation. It can help you with research, and it actually gives you the sources, which is very, very cool. So I use that, and I also use Promine AI, which I mentioned, because you can use it for free, or there's credits, but you get a lot of them to start off with. And the fact that you can very quickly decide on the different hats or brains that it's going to use means that it takes a lot less for me to generate or engineer the right prompt. So highly recommend you try all these tools. Highly recommend you check out my page as well for other suggestions, because the idea is to always just highlight cool new tools that I find on this journey. But I am very curious as well to see what are some of the key tools you're using for your research.
Primarily is ChatGPT. Though I don't ask it any latest questions because it's capped off until recently, right? Like
2021 or something like that.
Yeah, it's capped off at 2021, but now I think they've opened it up to the latest news as well as being on that, because of Bard has enabled that as well. I've started using Bard, so need to play around. It hasn't been the best thus far for me, like widely inaccurate answers right now for me, but I can, of course, it's Google, so you can expect that thing to improve substantially in the next coming weeks. And I'm curious, do you have anything for finance specifically? And you got me interested. Like, okay, I want to see my financial advisor, and I want to see what. I want to see what these tools would be capable of. Really.
So I don't have any specific resources because it's not an area I've really looked into. I know for sure there's going to be so many different tools. At the moment, you can always just go in and use Promine AI. There's the investment assistant brain or mind that it can use. And so I think this is where I'd start. But beyond that, I'm sure there's many other options.
I wonder if there's probably like a massive list of AI tools that you could potentially tap into. I wonder if there's probably one online. I'm curious if you know a website that can tap into.
Okay, so that website is called There's an AI for that. So
there's an AI for that.
There's a website called There's an AI for that you can search for AIs for different use cases, and provides those answers. And I think this is something, again, we're going to see a lot of growth in. And that's a place to start. That and pages like mine.
Absolutely, check it out. Do you want to tell the audience where and all they can find you?
Yeah, people can find me on Instagram at the moment at ai.skillset. At the moment, I'm only based on Instagram, but that might also grow into Twitter, perhaps YouTube in the near future. I mentioned some of this earlier, but the whole purpose of my page is, as someone who is not extremely technical or a developer or by merit of my job involved in this field, as someone who is just learning about AI from that perspective, I'm just sharing things that I find that I think can help others. So on the one hand, it's to give people information that they might be looking for, different tools to build websites, tools to edit your pictures, tools to help you with content generation, etc. But also, I want people to stumble on my page or my content, look at that half-a-minute video, and have their mind blown at the fact that they can do whatever this video is talking about, and then go ahead and try it and incorporate AI into their life. So if you guys are interested in that, it would be great to have you check out my page. Hopefully help you find something really cool.
And that wraps up the second ever episode. You can find Nick and his page in the show notes below. Do leave feedback if you have any, and do consider subscribing.